Winchester Planning Board meeting, first time in person in some time, and we're here for a very special occasion. We are here to interview Kelly Linema, not Carrie.
I know. Confusion of the public.
For town planner. So we had a process, let's see, to everyone out in town in TV land to bring you up to speed. We had posting for the job. It closed at the end of February. We had a number of applicants. We had a search committee which went through the applicants and came up with a short list. It was a very short list. And Kelly's with us this evening. You had an interview with town staff last Wednesday, and we'll go into that a bit later. Originally, because I was expecting to have more people, I came up, it's my fault, I came up with this concept of we would have questions submitted to the chair who would then try to make things more efficient, and I don't think we're going to do that. So everyone will have, let's say a few minutes to ask for questions. We'll go around a couple times. I'd love to hear a opening statement from you.
Sure.
And then after that, we'll have questions. Then I will report on my discussions with your references and with some of the comments from the town hall staff from last Wednesday. And then we can go into discussion, and we'll see where it goes from there. So please. Yeah.
So, hello everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I know, you're all in positions where you have a lot of meetings and you have a lot of meetings in the evening, so I appreciate you all taking the time to be here and your interest in this position. My name is Kelly Linema. I'm currently a municipal planner for the town of Arlington, and that's where I've been for the last 4.5 years. In that position right now, I'm the assistant director. I was promoted to assistant director after serving as senior planner. And since working for Arlington, I've done a lot of work with our historic and cultural resources working group, our master plan implementation committee. I've done a lot of work with outreach and engagement with Envision Arlington, which is a citizen committee designed to reach out to the community and foster conversations. So in that, I've done a lot of survey design. Right now, in my role, I do a combination of things. So a lot of my work is focused on housing, and that lately has been taken over by MBTA Communities, which is a very important process that we're trying to get through to a special town meeting this fall. So that's been a fast track project for us. I also work with our Affordable Housing Trust, and I worked prior to that with our housing plan implementation committee to manage the project of developing an HPP for Arlington, the HPP update. And then I've also worked with the Affordable Housing Trust, which was new, so I helped to work to identify candidates for that, bring those candidates to the select board, worked with them in the creation of a declaration of trust, and then the development of an affordable housing action plan. So we reached out to a lot of developers, affordable housing professionals in Arlington, and then we're able to see that project through to approval by the select board. I also do a lot of work with communications, outreach, and engagement. So I manage all of the communications for our department. I think, and I'll get into this in just a second, but I think communications is equally as important to planning as the technical side of planning. And then I also think about just our overall strategy and how are we communicating with the public so that we don't overwhelm people with too many messages, and that we try to cut straight to what's important about a plan or a project and try to communicate with people about what their motivation is for participating in any project whatsoever. And then I also monitor and track various projects. So I work closely with our building inspector, work on reporting to the Census Bureau and tracking information regarding the census, regarding building permits, monitoring change in the community over time so that we understand the scope and impact of what's happening in town and how any individual policy changes or zoning changes might relate back to that. Finally, I also work with our redevelopment board there, which is our equivalent of a planning board. So I work on reviewing special permit applications under environmental design review. And I do a lot of current planning in that role, but then I also do a lot of work with understanding zoning amendments, drafting zoning amendments, and then trying to understand how do we talk to people, particularly town meeting members, but also the general public about what those zoning amendments actually mean. Zoning is very hard. It's hard for people to understand, and trying to simplify it, particularly for new town meeting members who are kind of coming in off an April election and then going straight into voting on zoning. That's kind of our key period of trying to get that information out. I'll touch briefly on my background before that. So since graduating from planning school, I got my master's in urban planning from Harvard's Graduate School of Design. And after that, I worked in consulting. So I did a lot of projects ranging from comprehensive plans, worked on Cambridge's comprehensive plan, and a little bit on Boston's comprehensive plan, which is the first one they had done in 50 years. And then doing more area plans. I did a transformative development initiative project in Haverhill. I also worked up and down the east coast of the United States with MDBJ, so we did projects kind of all over the US. I have sort of a second background, which is before I went to graduate school, I had to finish my undergrad degree. And that's because after going to undergrad for a couple of years, I left school and I went to go work as a technical and professional writer for a couple of years. Actually, I have a 10-year experience in communications. So I did everything ranging from writing instructional manuals on how to assemble chicken farming equipment, which as a vegetarian, it wasn't a great thing, but sometimes you have to hustle to make ends meet and pay off student loans. And then I also worked in advertising and copywriting and graphic design. So all of that kind of feeds into the work that I do now with thinking about how to communicate about planning. People need to understand planning, not just from what a zoning amendment means. They need to understand like the context of a plan. When we're in a meeting with people, I think it's important to convey what does this actually mean? How do we break this down? Like talking about MBTA communities. There's a lot of detail about it, but what's really important to the people in the community when we're talking about what that change actually means. And the other thing that I learned from that experience is thinking about motivation. So what motivates people to get involved in something? How do we think about how various proposals will impact any individual person? So I try to do a lot of work about thinking from the perspective of personas. What does any individual person, how do they approach a project? What does it mean for them? And how might that impact them versus somebody else? The effect that something has on a planning board member has a very different effect on somebody who has recently moved to town, or maybe even can't move here because they can't afford it. So trying to understand those different perspectives is very important to me. So that kind of sums it up. I mean, on a personal level, I live in West Medford with my family. I have a husband and a daughter who's 8, 2 cats and a hedgehog. I don't recommend a hedgehog. That was a pandemic pet. We all make bad decisions. I guess that's the worst of it. I could be okay with that. And I on the weekends I just enjoy kind of getting out into nature. I like to hike. Been on a big fiction kick lately, so I've been reading a lot of books, doing puzzles and various crafts, and taking art class from my daughter, who is an aspiring artist. So, yeah.
So you're an expert on the Mystic Lakes?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. We, when I went to Tufts, I was on the marathon team there, and so I was able to run the Boston Marathon. Not because I qualified, but just because I was on that team. And so I spent a lot of time doing circles around the lakes. Yeah. And it's just beautiful. I love seeing it at all times of year.
There's a lot of people who start up. I think we're kind of late to start for. Did we do the marathon already? I think we did.
No, it's
next week.
4 weeks.
Yeah.
You can still run, Deb.
Yeah, you've got 2 weeks to get ready.
Well, I have a note written here which said, forgot to do roll call in open meeting. So, oh well.
Do I have to repeat
So
all
we're
that?
we're going to do a roll call and officially open this planning board meeting. So, if this were Zoom, I'd say I Ching.
Present.
Yes. Nick Rosettos.
Present.
Sally Dale.
I am here.
Carrie Layton.
Present.
And I, Deb Juris, and present. We have with us our recording secretary, Nancy Polcari. And our guests tonight are Ellen Spencer, Design Review Committee, Jacques Menage, Historical, Rich Mucci, Select Board, John Serbier, Housing Partnership Board, Beth Rudolph, Town Manager and Town Engineer. So, with that out of the way, why don't we just go round robin here? And Ellen, do you want to start?
Oh, gosh. I'm the chair this year of the Design Review Committee. It's an appointed committee of 7 rotating 3-year terms. 2 of us get appointed by the planning board, 2 by the Board of Selectmen, I believe, 1 by the town moderator. It's only 5, I forget who the other, anyway, we're appointed by different other town bodies. And we are an advisory board to the planning board. And as such, traditionally, I've been on for a while now. When I started, we were mostly, one of the things that's still in our purview is reviewing signage and that kind of thing. And with, we currently also, all the requests for special permits and site plan review also come to us as it's relatively recent development, which was part of the kind of rezoning of Winchester a few years ago. And we're also representatives of the Center Business District. So things that come through that, we also vote on and send our, our opinions to planning. And and that's a relatively new thing too. And my focus, as far as the town goes, has been, most recently, my concerns have been with the Center Business District, because we've got a lot of opportunities for development, which is great. But also called out in the regulations was the identification and the importance of preserving what we have here. And that's sometimes a lot of tension between those two things. So my concern is that we find that the town planner is kind of really aware of the balance of, and willing to work to, make that balance in a way that is really, obviously we want to develop Winchester. We don't want to lose what makes Winchester special and what everyone comes here says how charming it is downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, so I wondered, you mentioned historical, you've done some historical survey work, but I just wondered, in Arlington, there's historic stuff there too. Have you had any, what experience have you had with
Sure.
things like that?
Yeah. I mean, I do think historic preservation is very important. Sometimes, at least in my experience in Arlington, the question is about who are we preserving this for, why, and how. So I think it's important to understand, sometimes there's different motivations that people have for thinking about historic preservation. And I think there are different ways of balancing those things. I look to the city of Seattle has a couple of ordinances that I think are really interesting precedents. And it really comes down to what the community wants. But what Seattle has done, which I know Winchester is very different than Seattle, but I'm a planner, we always borrow from other communities. What Seattle has done is think about incentives for preservation of the facade or preservation of the ground floor, because they do want to see economic growth, and they don't want to necessarily pit historic preservation against economic growth. So if you are preserving the historic facade, you are given bonuses for preservation of that. Now that may not be what the community wants, but I think it's an important discussion to have. Another thing to think about is maybe disincentives for demolition. So if you, in certain zoning districts, you may have FAR incentives or bonuses for certain allowances, but there would be a disincentive for that if you did not preserve the historic element of a building.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing to understand is trying to balance economic development and growth. I think Winchester, like Arlington, does not have a split tax base and has probably a very low commercial tax base. So sometimes what we think about when we think about historic preservation is that, well, are there ways of taking the potential growth in a historic district and locating that growth elsewhere? So through transfer development rights, or thinking about, well, if we want to preserve these buildings, we have to allow the growth. It's a lever, right? You have to allow the growth to happen somewhere. So I think what's important, and what we did with our Historic Preservation Survey Master Plan in Arlington, was think about what's important, what are the areas that are important to preserve, And then what are you can't think about that without also thinking about the areas that are important to allow change and growth.
Right, well, the CBD regulations, which is a whole handbook in itself, which
Yeah.
you will need to become familiar with if you come here, has all sorts of, all that information in it, and it's kind of but it's a new-ish document, and I think we're all still kind of working our way through it, how what in theory, was put on paper works in the real world.
Well, most planning documents are iterative, it's never a finished process. So I think sometimes you work through something and then you realize, we just adopted new sign regulations in, I guess not new anymore, in 2018. And as we've gone through the process of using those sign regulations, we've realized that certain elements of them need to be changed. And sometimes that means going back to town meeting and saying, well, we need to do amendments on X, Y, and Z. And sometimes it's hard for the community to understand that it's iterative, but I think it's important to explain that that's part of the process. Is things are always changing. I think it's better than the alternative. But I think kind of understanding as planners and even historic preservationists, we need to kind of understand that our job is to manage change and growth and to direct it, but not necessarily stop it.
So Yi Chang from the planning board. I don't use this very often, but is this how close I need to be?
Yeah, you need to get it close.
Pretty
or
close.
else-
Okay. So
Not that close.
not that close?
Yeah, you'll be fine.
All
I'll
right.
pick you up.
All right.
See, I keep mine far away.
Okay. You have a loud voice. So I'm really pleased to see you here and have you here, and you very impressive resume, and I see a lot of familiarity in it. I was also a sociology undergrad, and went to the design school at Harvard as an architect, and you were an urban planner, and I think we were at different times. So I know for some, yes, the design school is very kind of like home base for modernism, and so it was very formal when I was there. And I think as I got out of it and things were changing and it got a lot more social, and of course like with urban planning there's all of that in the discussion of design. I also see UTL. I spent some time at UTL as well.
Great.
Yeah, but in the architecture realm. And I was also raised young kids in West Medford, so a lot of I feel like we were cooked in the same ovens.
I actually have been trailing you for a while.
Wait, who's applying for which job?
I want this job. Yeah. No, I don't want this job at all. But so I think, from my experience, and I'm sure you have a different one, and I know probably your colleagues at NBPJ too, but the ways that we've been taught have been really urban, I think, and even the term urban planner, I think, in Winchester would sort of stir up a little bit of like, no, we're very suburban, right? And I think, from that map up there, say the light yellow is minimum square foot lot sizes of 20,000. Okay? Very, very large minimum lot sizes. The yellow, the medium yellow is 10,000. So I know we're really close to Arlington, but but we're very different in that. I think that speaks a lot for itself, in that people come here and you're sort of expecting that kind of space and density. I think we're at the cross. We're more like Wellesley or Lexington in that attitude of like, hey, we need space, but it gets us in trouble because we're so much closer to the city than the others are. And so I think there's at any of these meetings, I see this resistance, or kind of not resistance, but like a little unwillingness to change what has happened. And so there's a stress of the density, the housing crisis coming from Boston, and then people being dismayed at the very expensive housing costs, and yet sort of a reluctance to sort of change our attitudes about land use, right? So I'm saying from my experience that this was a very new thing for me to see such an inherently suburban issue. And from Arlington too, I think it's very different because lot sizes are a lot smaller.
Yeah.
It's a lot more people, a lot more dense. So can you tell us maybe a time or like an issue that was very inherently suburban in some ways and how you handle that?
Well, I do think back to graduate school for that. So we actually did a study of Concord, where we had to, our requirement, it's actually kind of similar to MBTA communities in a way. We had to create a plan for allowing 10,000 new dwelling units in Concord. I think you can imagine how that would go over. And a lot of people thought, I mean, everybody thought about it in different ways. Like you can think about transit-oriented development, you can think about, that's what a lot of people did, was transit-oriented development. My proposal was to think about like creating little hubs of density, so you kind of break it up a little bit. I mean, this is a graduate school proposal, right? So, and it's coming from a school that bases everything on New York City, which was my frustration with the GSD, which is like, we're not New York City. New York City is a thing unto itself. Ultimately, like when you're thinking about things like MBTA communities, and again, we're not, Winchester isn't Arlington, but kind of understand, Arlington has the distinction of not having its district having to be located in any particular area. So we kind of have this situation where the district could be anywhere, which means, you know, we have our 9,000 square foot minimum lot sizes in Morningside, but that's probably not the most appropriate place to think about it. But then we don't want to pit neighborhood against neighborhood as like, well, we don't want it here or we don't want it there. I think contextually it's important to understand, what do we mean by density? Do we mean 3 families? Do we mean 6 families? I don't know if Arlington has, or Winchester has an inclusionary zoning bylaw, but like in Arlington it's triggered by 6. Do we mean more than that? I think in general, like the way that density changes when you look at a community like Winchester is it doesn't mean towers, right? It means something a little bit more like what we're talking about when we think about missing middle housing. So we're thinking about housing for that serves your teachers and your firefighters, or like maybe seniors who want to downsize, and they may not be able to take care of a house on a 10,000 square foot lot, but they want to stay in their community because they've spent a lot of time here. So I think that the needs change because your population is different. You have more of a commuter-oriented population, or probably now a lot of people working from home, and so it really comes down to kind of what the community wants. I mean, I have my own attitudes about things, but ultimately in a planning position, we're sort of midwives.
Yeah.
And so we have to structure conversations with the community to understand what the community wants, and then kind of bring in recommendations from other places, and from our own professional expertise to really think about, like, all right, what are the unintended consequences of this, and what are the recommendations for moving forward. It's hard to give an example from a suburban community.
Yeah.
I grew up in West Michigan on like farm area, so.
I'm a Michigander too.
Oh my gosh.
Detroit.
Okay, there we go. You know, so, and there everything is single family, and it's very far apart. So,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry, I don't have like a
No,
really good
it's all right. But
example,
it might be
community
more of like,
based.
hey, you know, we can't. It was maybe a warning or something. This is surprising to me. That
Yeah.
just like how, like inherently suburban this community is, right?
Yeah. You know, you in your master plan have identified certain priorities about transportation too, right? Sometimes in order to get better transit access, you need to think about a little bit of density somewhere.
Yeah.
Because the MBTA isn't going to come to a place that has half a dwelling unit per acre. You know, and you're not going to get a good grocery store in a place where, like...
Oh, you still opened a big can of worms
Oh,
there.
sorry. No, but no, I mean, sometimes people want those things. Sometimes they don't, right? But, like, some of the things that people want from an economic development perspective, they need a little bit more people in order to make them economically viable.
Right.
And so it's about balance. It's about, it depends. It's about really understanding what the community wants, and I haven't really been embedded in the community enough to understand that. This Winchester seems to me like a sort of an achievement community. I mean, people get here and they're like, wow, this is great, you know? You've got great schools, you've got beautiful homes, you've got like a very charming downtown. So I understand the desire to want to preserve some of those things and not think about like change all at once.
My turn? Well, first of all, Diab, thank you for inviting me to this. I appreciate that. I'm Rich Mucci. I'm chair of the Winchester Select Board. We operate much like Arlington Select Board as well. So I want to welcome you. Thank you for applying. Thank you for coming tonight and spending time with us. I think it's important for all of us to get to know you and be part of this process, so thank you for that. My first question is that it seems like you're part of a large department. I think you have 6 people in your department.
9.
9?
Yeah.
9. I think we have 9 people on the municipal side.
I mean, that comes with a caveat, right?
Yeah.
We have a Ken Pruitt, which is a very distinct and different role. We have our environmental planner / conservation agent, and
Sure.
we have a CDB. We're an entitlement community, so we have a CDBG administrator. So some of those things are very they just either exist elsewhere in Winchester or they're not within. But it still is bigger, yes, than 1.
Yeah, so coming here, you'll be one of one. As much as Diab and everyone has tried, we're still one of one at this point, and maybe that will change over time. But what do you think the challenges will be for that, and what do you think has prepared you to be that one of one, to wear many hats rather than just a specific role in a department?
Sure. Well, I think Arlington has done a lot to prepare me for that. So before, in my role as senior planner, my job was to really jump into everything. So we have in Arlington, we have a senior transportation planner, we have an environmental planner, we have a sustainability manager, and then the assistant director does a lot of housing work, right? The senior planner is sort of like just bounces around in the ether, except they get to assist different people with different levels of expertise, and so you get to dabble. Dabble is maybe like a careless word. You get to dive deep into various things. You end up being sort of a T-shaped person in the sense that you have experience in a range of things, but you're maybe not an expert in very many of them. And so I think I have a lot of experience. I worked with our transportation planner on Connect Arlington, a sustainable transportation plan. I've worked on the housing stuff, and I actually do a lot of that now. I've done research with our CDBG administrator. So I think I have enough experience in certain things to know where my understanding stops and where I need to call someone for help. And I think that's probably the most important thing when you're a staff of 1. It's also just an important thing as an adult and a professional, but just to know, all right, I've reached the limits of what I know and what Google can tell me, and I need to pick up the phone and talk to a few people, or I need to say, you know what, let's hit pause on this and try to find some funding. If this is really a priority, how can we turn this into a project and hire a consultant and think about a committee that is telling me wants to prioritize this. If they really want to prioritize it, let's think about how to turn this into a project and get more people involved. That would be my kind of, I think just in thinking about transitioning down to being one person. I do a lot of work supporting people, but I don't directly manage any staff in Arlington. So people, we all kind of run our projects independently, and sometimes we're running those projects and actually doing the work of the project. I did a lot of the writing of the action plan for the Affordable Housing Trust. But then sometimes we are working with consultants. So in a town where you have one planner, you have the town planner, a lot of that work is being done through consultants. And so you need to understand what's our kind of short, medium, and long-range goals as far as getting certain things done and kind of slotting those in and understanding where the funding is, or where do you need to write some grants and seek some funding in order to get projects done that the community wants to do.
Speaking of writing grants, the last person that held this position was very key in applying for grants for the town. And I would say was instrumental in the town getting several grants that have moved us forward tremendously. I know you've put on your resume grant writing, and you've mentioned grant writing here. How comfortable are you with that, and do you feel like you can take that lead on that process? Yeah,
I feel very comfortable doing that. I think the most recent grant that I applied for is I co-wrote the grant to get MassWorks funding in the amount of $300,000 to finish up to get to 100% design on an infrastructure project in Arlington, and we're in the process of applying for a $5 million grant for that. It's a lot of work. again, means picking up the phone and talking to a lot of people. But it's important. I mean, we're all limited by Prop 2.5, and we're limited by our own funding sources. So trying to understand that planning in particular needs to be kind of opportunistic and thinking about whether it's like MPBF funding for historic preservation projects or something larger like MassWorks and infrastructure funding. That's where I think the planner needs to be involved and engaged with the engineering department, with the select board, and thinking about like what things are coming down the pike and how do we fit this project into a grant cycle, or how do we make sure that we're applying for funding at the right time so that we can actually do the project when we need to do it.
And just one final question. Why Winchester?
Well, Ken gave Winchester glowing reviews. I know he's biased, he's a resident. But I think you have an excellent master plan. Your master plan is and I know some of you worked on this here, it's not just flattery, but it's an excellent master plan, and you really lay out the work that you want to do for the next 10 years. That guiding document is so important because it helps you get the grant funding. You know, you leverage that document in order to apply for funding. It also means that you have had really good participation from the community. And I also think you've done some interesting things in the last year. You have the central business district, even though if it does need some tweaking, maybe. You've been able to succeed in getting some of these things passed. So you also are, just recently passed an ADU bylaw. That means that you are thinking about context-sensitive ways to address certain crises, and I think that means a lot. I know some places are only interested in the status quo, like trying to find a balance, right? Because sometimes you don't want to jump in and say like this and this is broken. You want to take a step back and listen to people and understand what they want. But I think the community, from your master planning process and from the other documents that you've done, has demonstrated that you're thinking about things, and that's important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kelly, I had something prepared, just to try to keep things moving. But
Yeah.
I mean, Winchester is, to me, a tremendously special place.
Mm-hmm.
It's been known for its historic New England look and feel. And at the same time, we're working toward responsible growth and development. And I wanted you to speak a little bit to the ability to hold both of these objectives in hand. And I guess I would add that the historic New England look and feel of the town has been a defining characteristic of the town. And in that sense, it's very different from, say, a place like Medford or even Arlington in its specialness.
Yeah. You do have a beautiful downtown. It's kind of iconic. It's like one of those towns that people, and I don't know how to pronounce the name of your river. I'm really sorry. Abertona. Thank you. I looked at it a lot of times and I was like, I'm not even gonna try. But there's something really, kind of incredible about that. My husband grew up in Groton, so it's kind of another one of those, like, you've got the traditional green and you've got these buildings that are sort of centered around it. Again, I go back to like where the community has identified where growth needs to happen. It's not up to me to make those decisions, but that's where I think the master plan is important. And you've identified priority growth areas, and I know that there's the Main Street project, or the North Main project that's coming down.
Which is very exciting, actually, because it's almost a blank slate.
Yeah, and then you also have the industrial area that you're taking a look at, and so I think you're thinking about. I mean, growth isn't just about housing growth, it's about economic development. So, one of the things that we're doing in Arlington is MAPC just came out with a report on industrial land and about the diminishing amounts of industrial land in the greater Boston area. One of the best parts of that report, I was having a conversation with Steve Revelak, who's on our redevelopment board, is this table at the very end of the document that lists out different kinds of industrial uses. Mm-hmm. Those kind of resources are really helpful because you want to sit with the community, you want to sit with people who make decisions about these things and look through that list and say, okay, what's appropriate here? you know, not all industrial uses are appropriate in every location. We're also not, you know, you're not gonna have a fish processing plant in Winchester, and people probably don't want that. But there's other kinds of industrial or other kinds of economic development that the town might want to see.
Sure.
So those are conversations that really guide. Once you understand what people want to see, then you can start to understand what are your floor plates, what do your parcel sizes look like? Is your zoning designed to allow those kind of things to happen? It really kind of, it starts from what people want to see, and then you can start to dig into the research to understand what is that impact on the built form, and what do we need to change in order to unlock that potential.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Beth Rudolph, I'm the town manager, also town engineer. We had a very nice chat last week, so I appreciate being able to speak with you again this evening. One of the things that I've always enjoyed, I know we talked about this a little bit last week, about Winchester and the way our, I guess the lower level is set up as, you know, as the town engineer. In many towns, the town engineer is part of the DPW, but here we're our own department, and we very collaborative with everybody on the lower level, the Board of Health, the Conservation Commission, the Building Department, and the planning, which as municipal government goes, the planning department is still relatively new, right, in Winchester. Since I've been here, there wasn't a town planner. So I guess I'd be interested to hear from you in terms of how you see that collaboration with other municipal departments, and how maybe talk to how you've been able to achieve that in your role in Arlington as well.
Yeah. So in 2022, I completed the Suffolk MMA program in municipal leadership. That was a great step for me, because it's an excellent program, and I recommend anybody who's working within a municipality apply for and consider taking that program, because it helps you to see inside what does it mean to put together a municipal budget? What does it mean to think about HR from, you know, I mean, sure. I don't do anything with HR. I think about staff development, but you kind of see into like what is the work of a DPW department, and what does it mean to do union negotiations? All of these things are like incredibly complex, and as a planner, I would never really touch on them. One of the things I've done since becoming assistant director is invite different department heads in. It doesn't really relate because would be a department of one here, sure. But invite other staff or other department heads from different departments to come in and talk to our department, so we can understand like what are the various priorities. You know, when we do a project or a plan that impacts, you know, that maybe recommends bike lanes, what does it actually mean for DPW and engineering, right? What does engineering, what is their plan for street improvements? And maybe we need to think a little bit, we need to coordinate a little bit more on plan recommendations and how we prioritize different kinds of implementation. And I'm on a daily text basis with our inspectional services department director, who is just an incredible resource. And so I think like developing and maintaining those relationships is really important. I think it starts by maybe like just setting up some quick one-on-ones, you know, in the first couple of weeks that I'd be here, is to really just understand what are the pressing things that are happening in those departments, and how do they perceive like the town planner and the work that the planning board is doing, kind of intersecting with those things.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I feel like I shouldn't ask any questions because I've asked lots of people questions about you, but I do, and you stole mine, so.
Sorry.
That's okay. It was a really good
Stole my
question.
seat, so
It was a
that's
good question.
Wow.
So the planning board is the special permit granting authority for the Center Business District. Mm-hmm. And we haven't had that many projects come before us, but one is coming before us really soon, and that's a 60-unit development on town property.
Okay.
So can you talk a little bit about your experience working on projects which, for Winchester, that's big, although we do have a couple of bigger 40Bs, but this one's smack dab in the middle of our downtown. Yeah. So can you talk a little about your experience dealing with projects which might have been in areas that a lot of people consider to be a really important, charismatic part of town?
Well, I will say that Arlington also does not get 60-unit project proposals unless they are a 40B. So, I have worked with 40Bs in Arlington of up to 130 units. But again, they weren't like right in the center of anything. Recently, the redevelopment board, which is the SPGA for Mass Ave and Broadway, permitted a project at 190 to 200 Mass Ave, and that's right in the center of the East Arlington Capitol Square neighborhood. This was the third time that this project came before the redevelopment board. The first one was, it was eventually withdrawn because there was and it was before me, but it was because the FAR that the proponent wanted to have was not compliant with the zoning bylaw, and they wanted a waiver from it, and it was just too much. We just couldn't do it. The second time was very similar, but it was almost like a spite proposal where they had sort of eliminated all transparency on the ground floor, and we're just like, they were threatening a 40B, which I don't think anyone should ever threaten a 40B. I don't think that's the right way to go about it. And so the third time, we met with them multiple times as staff before they filed their application. We talked with them about ways that the zoning bylaw had actually changed in the interim, so there was a higher FAR that actually changed their approach to the project, and they stopped thinking about a 40B, and they started to think about how to work a little bit more collaboratively with staff. What ended up with that project is we have a really nice, if this gets built, it's been approved, is that they've devoted a really nice corner of the project at Lake and Mass Ave to the public realm. And it is a corner that right now is tight. It's got a very narrow sidewalk, and then it kind of turns down onto another narrow sidewalk where there's a bus stop and then a lot of just street clutter. And it's going to really change that corner. It's not a huge space, but it's I think going to be an important space for the center of a really important business district. Now, the project is still going to result in the demolition of a series of what are currently single-story buildings, none of which are historic, so I guess it doesn't, that's maybe a little bit different. But we really wanted to think about the context and work with the developer to say, like, all right, if you're really going to keep coming back with the project, let's think about how we can do this in a way that's going to work for the community. That's, again, there are still going to be people who are upset about this. It's hard as a board. You're making decisions about things, and somebody's going to walk away mad. That's kind of part of planning. But I think there are ways of kind of working with an applicant before they even maybe get to the public hearing process to think about what's the best way to bring this to the community. And we actually got them to do a couple of meetings with neighbors too, to walk them through the project before they brought it to the ARB. And then during the hearing process, they actually went back and talked with a couple community members about creating a plan for construction and demolition, because that was one of the big concerns, was the impacts on the neighbors during construction. They were less concerned about what was going to happen afterward, but it was more about this is going to impact my life for a year, and it's going to make me miserable. So trying to understand what's the particular thing that people are concerned about, it was important in that process.
I mean, luckily for us, the only historical thing that we're getting rid of is asphalt, I believe. It's on a parking lot, and it is a town-supported, driven, so, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Sally Dale, and I'm Vice Chair of the Planning Board. My question is a bit of a helicopter question, just jump it up. I know you've done your research, a good amount of research on the town, reading our master plan, which I'm very grateful for. What do you see as, how would you characterize the state of affairs in Winchester, and what do you see as our greatest opportunities and our greatest challenges And what will you bring? I know, this is important. And what will you bring? What will you bring to advancing those opportunities and addressing those challenges?
We won't hold you to this answer.
I try to get to Bill for a response to this question.
Are you serving breakfast?
Yeah, I know. Oh, man,
No, wine.
That's a huge question.
I know it's a big one.
Yeah, well, I mean, challenges are the same challenges that a lot of communities in the kind of the inner core. I don't know if you're quite inner core. You might just be outside of inner core from the MAPC perspective, but you are kind of in the inner ring, inner suburban, right?
North suburban, yeah.
North suburban.
A commuter ticket is like a 1A, so
Yeah.
is the cheapest.
Yeah, so you're sort of like, by proximity, you're dealing with some of the pressures that Arlington and Belmont are dealing with, but it's just a very different kind of community because of, like what you mentioned, with the lot sizes and everything like that. You know, I think there's, I think MBTA communities is a challenge. So I think it's an opportunity. I think it's important to think, you know, when you're sort of faced with these state requirements, right? Same with 40B, right? It's an opportunity. There are ways of addressing it that are context sensitive. You can think about, well, what's the right amount of units to provide, and how does this fit with recommendations of our master plan, right? Your master plan, it does have recommendations about housing, so maybe how can we incorporate some of those things together so that it's more than just grudgingly kind of complying with something, but thinking about how you can get more. You can advance multiple things at the same time. Transportation, I think, is an issue. One of the things I heard in the interview with staff was thinking about, which I found interesting, is, you know, your school populations. People come here because of the schools, so you have maybe a little bit of a different experience with growth of you know, your school age community, and you also have a different perspective on transportation with regard to school drop-offs and congestion around those things.
Kids in Arlington take the city bus to school.
Yeah, exactly. Same with Medford. Same with Medford, right? So, thinking about things like safe routes to school, thinking about how do you design things for your 8 to 80 population. I think one of the things that Winchester, if it hasn't already seen, but may start to see, is aging of your population. You probably have seniors here who are very sensitive to changes in your taxes. They're sensitive to they're sensitive to growth, and they're also maybe trying to seek ways to stay in their community. And so I think, you know, ADUs are an interesting way of thinking about that. I think there's also, you can think about that from your built form, and you can think about that from a policy perspective. Those are sort of things that are actually happening on a regional level too. But it doesn't mean that there's like a regional approach to getting things done, right? When we think about MBTA communities, once you figure out where your district is, or districts, you want to take a look at what are your lot size, what are we actually dealing with? Winchester, like a lot of other communities, is pretty built out, right? So you're looking at, like, well, what can your final recommendations, what can your zoning amendment do that kind of responds to the context of the homes that are already there? You don't have to have a zoning district that means that any new building that's built under MBTA communities looks like an MBTA communities building, right? You know, you have design review. You can think about things from a context-sensitive perspective. You don't have to have a pastiche of historic buildings, but you can think about how maybe some of those elements are brought through in new construction. I think the one other thing that Winchester is probably seeing is, and I know this because I've studied it in Arlington, is a teardown phenomenon. You have smaller homes that, because of rising property values and your land value greatly exceeds the value of different buildings, those homes end up being torn down, and what gets put up probably maximizes what you could do on that. Because a builder looks at that and says, well, we can, you know, I need to get a certain amount per square foot, and people will pay a certain amount to be in this community because it's maybe better than paying for private school or something like that. And so I think trying to think about how do you dig into that conversation is important. You also need to think about it from the perspective of somebody who maybe has all of their wealth in their home. And if you restrict what can go onto that property after they sell it, they're maybe losing out on their retirement. So you kind of need to balance those perspectives. Mm-hmm. We addressed it in Arlington by thinking about residential design guidelines. And those are guidelines that are taken into account as part of granting a special permit. Because that sort of category of neighborhood character is a really squishy one. And so the guidelines were a way of reaching out to the community and understanding what the community wanted to see in new construction, and then establishing like a set of guidelines that were ways to think about new construction. Mm-hmm. I would say those are kind of key issues.
That's a pretty good hit list.
It's probably not everything. It's probably not, I don't know, I'm probably missing the most important one, but
No,
you know, they're like a set of
it's-
issues that I think aren't unique to Winchester, but I think the way that Winchester responds to them can be very unique.
Okay. I'm Carrie Layton. I'm on the planning board very recently, but thanks. I represented Precinct 2, which is over closer to the light industrial area, on town meeting, and then also throughout the master plan process. Happily took my tiny part of kudos for that work. It's a very bright and deliberative town, and we had lots of enthusiastic feedback and really awesome leadership for that project. And then after that, I served for several years on the Conservation Commission. And so I will orient my question from that perspective. So we're thinking about, sort of we had our Holton Cross Forum, and we're thinking about what to do with the light industrial area. And in the middle of it is Davidson Park. And then we've done a ton of restoration work on the Aberjona River. And we have this, restored herring run that comes through town every spring, and like the bird migration comes, and then the nature photographers follow the birds. And it's a really special, unique element of the town. And we have seen a major project downtown that was stopped when it came up against the Wetlands Protection Act, the waterfront issues came up and came in conflict with that development. So you mentioned working with the sustainability director. We're so happy to have Ken Pruitt here. So can you speak to any experience or any interest for you in that sort of balancing of the really precious kind of exhale of Winchester as our beautiful natural resources and our ancient trees and our beautiful river? So how you can work, on, sort of improving and building and managing the built environment in balance with our natural resources.
I sort of have the benefit of having those staff to work on some of those things, but it's
trickier here.
I think too. I don't know if you're familiar with the Mugar wetlands in Arlington, and there was a 40B proposal that recently went through there. That was approved. I don't know if it's actually going to be constructed or not. Everything got wonky during the pandemic, including the price of steel. So. There are people who are not satisfied with that project, but I think there are elements of that project that are a win, because we were able to rethink the footprint, work with the developer to rethink the footprint of the project. You have a limit when you have a 40B project, right? Because a community hasn't done what it needs to do to provide affordable housing. And so then you lose the ability to restrict a lot of things. That project was in partially what's a state wetland, but then also it was in a local wetland, and we can't do a lot of jurisdiction over that in a 40B. But it was through a process of collaborating with the developer to say, well, we understand you're going to do this project, but how can we have you adjust the footprint? How can we have you think about your stormwater systems and think about what are you giving back to the community? What are you doing to make sure that this project not only doesn't create more stormwater runoff, but actually controls it better, and actually maybe can resolve some other problems for other people in the neighborhood? And again, there are people who are not happy about that project, and they will never be happy about that project. But I think there are ways of thinking about, like, what are ways that for a project like that we didn't really have a whole lot of, ability to do anything about, we were able to make it a better project for the town. Sometimes thinking about things like trees and open space, I think we all value those. Like, we don't necessarily want to see heat islands in our communities. I think it's important to have maybe a nuanced conversation about things like trees and open space. If you have an aging tree that also is in a really hazardous place where you're trying to encourage more kids to walk to school, maybe there's ways of thinking about, well, if we want to improve safety for kids, maybe it's about getting rid of this tree and then planting more trees elsewhere. It's not a popular thing to suggest, but sometimes you have to weigh these things in the balance, because I have a poster in my office at home that says, do not look at things from only one perspective, and it's written this way, right?
Yeah.
Because I think as planners, it's our job, it's my job to think about the whole system of things. And so trees are one part of that system, open space is another part of that system, managing stormwater, managing growth, those are other parts of that system.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for being here. This is a long night. You're right.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You have town meeting coming up, come on.
Great. John Serbier from the Housing Partnership Board. I just, as an aside and introduction, we're working now on our first 2 friendly 40Bs.
Great.
As opposed to a more contentious
Yeah.
40B, and the intent is to accomplish a lot of things that you described.
Yeah.
My question involves communication. In your opening statement, you emphasized communication in your letter of transmittal. You talk about communication. Your resume emphasizes that. Can you get, and what we're coping with, among other things, is, there's 2 things we're coping with. One is the demise of the print media. So there's no longer a local newspaper.
Yeah.
So we've lost that mechanism. And society at all levels of government has become much more polarized. And you've alluded to that. Can you be a little bit more specific in terms of your work in Arlington? What kind of communication techniques have you tried out to reach out and reach town meeting members, meet residents, businesses? What are you doing to try to achieve a more civil discourse?
I wish I could do more to make a more civil discourse.
Excuse me, does Arlington still have a paper?
So we're with this Star, the Advocate and Star.
So
Yeah.
no, so no.
It's
So no.
we have so there's the default, right? So we have a social media presence. We have Facebook. I work with our public information officer. I don't think you have one in Winchester, but we've developed a communication kind of framework that I will bring with me no matter where I go, which is it's a way of thinking about projects in terms of campaigns, because that's kind of how you think about things in the communication world. And it's got a calendar attached with it, and we create communications plans for every single one of our projects. We use Facebook and Twitter. I never personally will post on Facebook or Twitter for a project. I don't want to engage. I don't want to get in a back and forth with people on either of those media because it's hardly ever productive. We do post on those things. Those are what I would consider as like education and awareness, like just trying to raise awareness of certain things happening. We have tried different ways of engaging people using surveys, using the website, using different tools. All of those things are important, but none of it matters if you don't actually directly invite people. So what has really, it's maybe a little old-fashioned, and I think that's not a bad thing, But I do a lot of picking up the phone. I talk to different staff who represent different boards and committees, and I ask them, hey, we have this survey out about this project. We really need to hear from your board and committee, and we need everybody on that board and committee to get at least one other person to respond. I have had I've had office hours, so we've done that in advance of town meeting, particularly if there's a suite of amendments that are coming from the redevelopment board. We've had office hours and invited people. Sometimes you can't just sit there passively. You have to directly invite people to come in. Like I say, hey, I heard at this public meeting you had questions about this. I have office hours from this time to this time. Come in and talk to me about that. That actually has been the way of working with kind of some of our biggest opponents, who maybe still are opponents. Some people just aren't going to move. But it's also working with people who are maybe in the middle on a decision.
Right.
And trying to explain, well, you're hearing a lot of this out in the world. I just want you to understand the facts of this. I want you to understand who we've talked to get to this point. I want you to understand how this fits within the context of what we're trying to do and fits within the master plan. Those one-on-one conversations, or reaching out to, like, do a lot of research or do a lot of outreach with Erica Schwartz, who's our new director of the Housing Corporation of Arlington, and talking to her about, like, how can I communicate with residents in Housing Corporation properties. Same with Jack Nagel, who's the Arlington Housing Authority Executive Director. Kind of creating those relationships with different individuals and leaders in town has been really important in making sure that we're reaching out to people. One final thing that we've been doing a lot of is doing meeting in a box kits for various projects. And so that's just kind of creating a suite of tools that people can use to run their own meeting and turn those materials back into us. And what that means is, what I'm doing is reaching out to a chair of a board or committee, or reaching out to a head of a community organization and saying, hey, this project is happening. We've created these kits so that you can facilitate your own meeting. Can I print these out for you? And will you help me? And will you help run a meeting for me? Or will you get one of your leaders in your community to run this meeting? Because people want to talk to the people they know. They don't necessarily want to talk to town staff. It requires a lot more work, but if you really want to hear from people, it's an important way to go.
Thank you, Jack Menage again, Historical Commission. Your comments, and both here and in your cover letter about communications, really hit home with me, because that's where my career was, communication and engagement on the corporate level.
Yeah.
And I've written 2 books on the subject, so.
Oh. I shouldn't be talking about it then. I should be listening to you.
You want to become assistant, you can become assistant town planner.
We can learn from each other.
We're hiring.
So that's a big plus, and the other big plus is that you're left-handed.
Only the best.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ellen said a lot of what I wanted to say, as did Nick, and the whole issue of historic, obviously, is my bailiwick, but it touches on so many different areas. Like what John and I have been talking about recently is this notion that, as you said, that the smaller, modest homes, some of which are historic and some of which are not, go away because the builders want to max it out, and they go right up to the setbacks and the height limits, and they get a $3 million house out of it, where they only had, maybe they paid $700,000, $800,000 for a house. But what we lose is that housing stock. And so Winchester is in danger, or in the near future, of becoming stratified. You've got the 40B affordable housing, and you've got the $2 and $3 million houses, and nothing in the middle.
Yeah.
The Historical Commission inadvertently plays a small role in that. We can try to protect some of that housing stock, but ultimately we only have a 12-month delay on the issuance of the demolition permit, and that's going to go away anyway. So there's not a lot we can do about it. One area where we can is local historic districts.
Okay.
Winchester has none. We have a study committee. We're working on one right now in Sims Corner, if you know the neighborhood. It's down toward
I
your...
just know the name Sims. They're
Yeah,
everywhere in this region.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's
It's the rotary that you cringe every time you have to drive through.
Oh, there we go,
Yeah.
yeah, 38.
It's the cringe-worthy local historic
To
district.
be fair, I did grow up in the Midwest, we don't have rotaries there, so it took me a long time not to cringe before driving through
That
rotaries.
one's particularly challenging.
Yeah.
One of the things, and those of us who have been on town meeting for a while know this with our town meeting, is that there's a lot of, I don't know how you put it.
Resistance.
Pardon me?
Resistance.
Resistance is a good word. There's a lot of libertarianism where you can't tell me what to do with my house unless you want to pay my mortgage kind of stuff. You know, you can't tell me I have to save my house if I want to tear it down. So we run into that, and in our preliminary work in trying to establish this local historic district, we ran into some of that. Some of the residents say, I don't want to join this local historic district where I can't do something without my neighbor's approval. So we're running into that, and
Yeah.
obviously that's a communication problem. I know that. And we're sort of in a hiatus right now because we're leaderless. Brian was our leader and we've lost him. So we're waiting for, I don't know what, select board to appoint a new leader, because select board owns it, historical commission cannot own it by law. I have to remind Rich of that. I did tell Michelle all about this, that she was gonna step into this, but I'm digressing. Arlington has 7 local historic districts, from what I understand, encompassing about 300 properties. I don't know if you've had anything to do with them in terms of
All
setting them up
created
before you?
In the 80s.
Really?
Yeah, and I think they've been updated over time, but most of them were really stemmed back. There was a big initiative in the 80s. There were a lot of properties added to our local inventory, and then there were the historic districts that were created at the same time.
So there must be local historic district committees or?
Yeah.
So do you have any interaction with them?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I did when I was working with the Historic and Cultural Resources Working Group, because Steve Michalka, who's the head of the Historic Districts Commission, sits on that committee. And so we worked with him a lot. They've done a lot of work on creating some really good design guidelines. They're a very transparent committee, which is really helpful. I don't know anything about, I don't know how your committee runs or not. I'm not saying this as an accusation or anything, but they're kind of working with what they have. So it hasn't really been expanded, and I don't think there's been a push to expand it. We did do a report on demolitions and replacement homes, and I actually authored the report. So I studied 20 years of demolitions in Arlington. I can send you a link to it, sure. That because town meeting did raise a concern about demolitions, there are certain economic factors that are beyond historic preservation that are challenging, and I think you're running against that because you do have people who they're maybe house rich and cash poor, right? And so you kind of need to think about the concerns of that. I think it's important to consider who are you preserving it for, why and how.
You said
Right.
that earlier.
Yeah,
I think that's a great question.
Because I think you could think about, and something that I think we've thought about from an affordable housing perspective is, could you permit, if you're, I don't think you have an affordable housing trust, but if the affordable housing trust could purchase.
We do actually, we do.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
Okay, great,
within-
congratulations,
it's new,
yeah.
within
Okay,
the
yeah,
last 2 years or so.
So, if they could somehow work with a private, or with a nonprofit affordable housing developer and leverage some of their funds in order to buy some of these properties, they would also need to be allowed to build more smaller units on that parcel,
Yeah.
right? So it becomes a question of zoning, becomes a question of what are you trying to preserve? Because affordable housing needs other development in order to finance it and to leverage the cost, right?
Right.
So, the other thing that we've seen in Arlington is you can't buy even a tear-down home for $700,000 anymore.
True.
They're going for
Same here.
1.1 million.
Same here.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
So unless you can do something about land costs, those aren't starter homes.
Right.
They're not starter homes for anybody anymore. So that's the recommendation of that report on demolition and replacement homes, was in response to town meeting wanting to extend demolition delay for anything older than 50 years in the entire town. almost all housing in Arlington is older than 50
Right,
years.
right.
So, and
Pretty
our
ambitious.
historical commission could not handle that. Like, there's no way from a management perspective.
Right.
It would have been way too much work. And ultimately, it would have just expanded demolition delay. So I think there's a,
12 months you have?
yeah, it's 12 months. And we're at a point economically where a builder will wait that out. 12
Yep.
months
That's
is
right.
not that
Same
long,
here.
right? So it has to be, I don't know if there's a satisfying solution to it. You know, one solution is to allow for more properties to be built on the same parcel. I don't know if Winchester would go for that, right?
That was sort of what ADU was all about.
Yeah. Another solution is to think about residential design guidelines. So, you know, you can't necessarily stop a home from being torn down, but you can sort of shape or have some more context to what's being put up. It's a conversation that has to happen with the community.
Yep, we've been, I mean, we've made a lot of progress. I've been on the historical commission for 15 years, and relative to where we are now, back then it felt like a social club, because we have a lot more responsibilities. Ellen alluded to the new zoning bylaws, and both for the whole town, but also for Center Business District, where the planning board is the permit granting authority, and the design review committee and historical commission sort of give our recommendations to them
Okay.
in project that happens in this district. That's new, and that's pretty cumbersome in terms of, like, we really have to do our homework.
Yeah.
Where it used to be sort of, like I said, a social club, but it's much more, it's tougher now. It's tougher.
Yeah, it's a politically challenging position to be in. You're
So-
making decisions about people's property.
Yeah, and we tightened up our demolition delay bylaw considerably, 2016.
Okay.
And that expanded it considerably. We didn't get the 50-year, but we went anything before 1941,
Okay.
which increases the number of hearings that we have probably by triple.
Mhm.
So we're pretty busy.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. Those are like 10 agenda item nights.
Yeah.
Well, at least in Arlington they are. You've got a smaller, what do you have, 20-something thousand people here?
23,000,
Yeah.
You're about double what we are.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm happy to send you that report. Part of the reason for the report was to understand data, because we didn't have a sense for what's the scale at which this is happening. What the report really indicated to us is it was happening in specific streets at a time. And so it feels like it's happening everywhere when it's happening on your street. If it's not happening right in your neighborhood, you might not even be aware of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think Brian, before he left, he did do something along those lines.
So
There's definitely a map.
engineering
Engineering
keeps
has
a map
figured out
since
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
year. We update it every year,
2005
yeah.
probably, where we update where the
You
teardowns
have
have
that
been.
data.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
In
you
the G- in
pinpoint
GIS.
the houses that predate 41.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
very helpful.
Yeah.
And it's also depressing.
But the cost of housing that's a regional issue.
Yeah.
You know, and your cost of housing is gonna continue to rise, whether Winchester changes demolition delay or not. And it's really, you know, I mean, if it's a macroeconomics thing, and, you know, you kind of have to, there's a shortage regionally, and you live within a really good distance of downtown, so it's a challenge.
There are, I won't tell you what I call them, but there are people out there. I live in an 1840s house, and we get letters at least once a week, people offering to buy our house, and I know what they want to do.
Yeah.
You know, and there are people out there who are sending letters to, they follow the obituaries, literally. They're like vultures, and they will send out these letters to the family. And they'll tear down the house, and the family's happy to be rid of it, you know? And there goes another nice little house.
Yeah.
But you know all about that.
Yeah. You could think about donating it to your affordable housing trust.
You get two a week, I get at least one. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So we're an hour and 15 minutes into this. Doesn't seem like it's been that long, but it is getting late. So are there any other follow-up questions that people want to ask Kelly?
When can you start?
Just one thing, what excites you most about what you understand you would be coming to?
I mean, I like a balance of current planning and long-range planning. That is something I did not anticipate that I would like when I started working for a municipality. I was, part of the reason why I went into consulting after graduate school is because I was sort of turned off by project reviews and that sort of thing. what I like about it is you see the impact of different changes. You see the impact of long-range planning, right? When you look at things incrementally from like project proposals that are coming through, you can see how different changes to policy influences what the outcome is. So it's kind of like connecting things full circle. I think you have some exciting projects that I could dig my teeth into, which is, you know, that North Main Street project and the Holton Cross. Like, some of these projects are really exciting because you're thinking about, like, what do we want to see here? What could this neighborhood become? What could this street become? I love having what-if conversations and thinking about how to kind of work with a consultant in order to guide that change or to think about what the community wants to do. Mm-hmm. I also I love working with data, and I like collecting and building my own data sets and thinking about like how to use that information in order to tell a story. I think that's an exciting thing about planning in general is the storytelling. They're not fake stories. We're just trying to tell a story. One thing that somebody had told me is when you're trying to work with a complicated zoning amendment or something like that, how would you write it in a children's book? And it's helpful. It's helpful. I mean, to think about like, yeah. So I think that storytelling is exciting, and thinking about how we communicate things is really exciting.
I just have one more quick question, and that is that how do you feel about the fact that you would be it here?
Yeah.
Where that's not true now. That's probably going to be the biggest. You obviously have tons of experience, but that's going to be the biggest change and possibly challenge, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be a challenging first 6 months to kind of wrap my head around things and prioritize. I talked with Brian a couple times before applying because I wanted to get his perspective. You know, it's always important to know even why somebody left, right? And he had wonderful things to say about this community. I think, you know, he had said that he would stay here. I didn't envy his commute, you know. That's a tough commute. I think the scale, this is a smaller community, the scale of the work is different. Like, the ask isn't for me to do the amount of work that Arlington does with being one person. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a different like amount of project proposals that are coming through. There's a different amount of planning studies that are being done. So I think it's just kind of like, it's sort of like scaling the work down to what one person can do. Instead of what you're going to want
an assistant pretty darn.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing, right? I mean, every municipality wants a lot more out of its staff than what any person can humanly do. But that's municipal work. So.
We want more too,
Yeah.
but we just haven't been able to get town meeting to do it.
Yes, we will keep asking town meeting. I do want to make one point. As town manager, could you get that clock?
I know.
So-
Every
'cause
time I
it's
sit
not
here in a
10 of
meeting,
8,
I'm
it's
like,
10 of 9.
I almost jumped up earlier today to fix it.
every time I sit here, I think about it, and then I leave, and I forget about it. So I
Oh,
say,
we've got an
forget.
extra
Savings,
hour.
is it
No, we
mine?
don't.
I think it's just a matter of adjusting your
Yeah.
perspective for half the year.
Yeah.
Right.
So, thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's been a real pleasure. What I'd like, I would like this procedure to move as quickly as possible. So I'm hoping that everyone can, you could stay if you want, but we're going to be talking about you.
Oh.
So I would love to hear everyone's input. I want to relate to you what I've heard from those references, something about what came out of the meeting with town staff. And if we could have a discussion and, you know, come to a decision tonight, I would love that, just because Sally and I are really sick of playing town planner. So, I don't know if you want to stick around.
Do you want me to stick around?
You know, it's up to you. I don't want to
This
put
is
you
the
in
part
the
of the
position.
interview that's a stress
I
interview.
don't think it's necessary.
It's not
No, not at all.
necessary,
I
it's
would
not necessary.
Take a night off
all
from
right.
Winchester.
Yeah, okay.
Take the out.
All right, well, you know, please feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions. I'm sure a lot of times you leave a conversation with more questions than you came in with, so feel free to follow up, and I've been in touch with
We
Dia,
will,
so.
we will talk with you tomorrow,
Okay,
just to let you know what's happening.
thank
Or
you
you
so
can-
much.
Go find someone who listens to WinCam and you can watch
Oh, yeah.
The one
it. Yes. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was really nice to meet all of you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
You must be so talked out.
Oh, it depends. I put it on for a meeting and then I go home and crash. So, yeah. I actually am an introvert, if you would yeah. A social one, but, all right.
Thank you so
all.
much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so last Wednesday, Kelly met with, and you were there,
I was there.
Kelly met with town hall employees from, I don't know, was Al Weil was there from the building
I was
department?
there, yeah, everybody from engineering,
Meg
Ken
White
was there, yeah.
Ken Pruitt was there. Ken is biased because he worked with Kelly when, in
He's
Arlington.
also one of our references.
Yes, everything I heard was positive. People said that Kelly was very knowledgeable, very personable. As we saw this evening, I think really able to communicate well, and that she had the knowledge base and the skills to fit in well with town staff. And so that, I think, was really positive. I reached out, no, I gotta find it again. I managed to get a hold of 3 of her contacts, of her references. Jenny Raitt, we spoke this evening. She was the Director of Planning in Arlington. And we were unable to speak shortly, but let's go through all my notes here. She had a lot of experience in organizing reviews and comments, for instance. So for instance, for comprehensive permits, they did not staff the ZBA, but apparently she put together all of the reports from all of the committees and essentially helped them manage the process, setting up scheduling, letting them know. So it's sort of like when we had the River Street, we did have a consultant who helped with that, but she did all of that. She worked a lot with the select board. So she started as town planner, and then she became senior planner,
Yeah.
and then she became assistant planner.
Assistant director.
Sorry. They do have a very strange, coming from only knowing one planning department, they have this planning department where they have a lot of specialty planners.
Right.
And so, one of the things I think is important is that she did work, as she said, as senior planner, but then as she became assistant director, it's a complicated thing about who oversees whom, I think, but she did work with everyone, and so she had a lot of exposure to all the different parts. Everyone said she has great management skills. I asked how she dealt with challenging community members, and she's apparently really good with that. As she mentioned, she brings them in, she engages them, gave them discrete tasks to keep them productively engaged. So maybe she can get us some help.
That's great.
Everybody talks well about her attitude, her, apparently they had multiple master plan implementation committees. And so she worked on one with the historical committee. She mentioned that. There was also another committee which came up with these residential design guidelines, which was apparently a difficult committee to work with, but she managed to guide them to what sounds like they have a design guidelines. If you want to come in and tear down a house, they for special permits. So that was really good. Because of her fine management skills, or time management skills, she pivots as needed. She does well in both long and short-term goals. She has experience with state agencies. She mentioned her grant writing. I didn't get a lot of input on that. She apparently, in Arlington town meeting, the town planner doesn't have to present things at town meeting. The department head usually does, but so she hasn't been tested before town meeting, but an Arlington town meeting has 85 articles before them. So I don't think I want anyone to be tested like that.
Do they really?
Yes, they do, every year. I have a
Yeah.
friend on those.
So for instance, who did I speak with? So I also spoke with Erin Zorko, who was assistant department head, I'm sorry, I'm losing it, who actually was when she was around when Kelly was hired. Really good, she managed lots of people, she was aware and involved with all of the planners. She loves research and data analysis, I think we saw that tonight. And she really excels at parsing out land use data, translating the wonky into the understandable. I don't know if that was Erin's words or mine. She was the one who, for instance, wrote all of the planning department comments to the ZBA. She has, great customer service, friendly and engaging attitudes. Erin also mentioned Kelly's work on the teardowns. And then the last person I spoke with was Ken Pruitt, who we all know and love. So Ken worked on her in that intersection between his job, he was doing energy, he was the energy manager or something like that. He found she was really good at talking with the public. She has good presentation skills and graphic skills, which is something that we need. She helped him he worked on her with a couple of big projects, found her to be engaged in the work, what is the word I'm looking for? Took initiative, handy with data, good people person, loves working with other people. Smart, hardworking person. Okay, lots of good things. I asked him if he could say something bad about her, but he would not. I think that's all the input I got. I would love to hear everyone's thoughts. Let's just keep it open, wide open.
Well, I think all those, what everyone said was on display tonight here, so I think she's an excellent candidate. We'd be very lucky to have her.
Yeah, having met with her twice in the past week, she seems fantastic, and she has a great communication style, and I was
gonna say, my bias is communications, that's clearly central to the job, and I think she would excel at that, and being able to communicate what it is the planning department's trying to achieve to the variety of audiences across various positions within town, but also most especially town meeting, was really critical to sell.
When we reviewed the 7 applications, hers was the strongest by far.
Oh, by far.
And the result of the interview, she's even
me too.
3 or 4 steps levels above by far at this point in terms of any of the other candidates. And I was very impressed by, the communication stuff was there. The other thing that came through was that she likes to address explicitly trade-offs and balances. And that's something that I've done in my professional life. A lot of people don't do that. And I think in terms of a town planner, that's absolutely critical. So I would be in favor of offering her a job tonight. Call her up tonight.
Here.
I think one thing when we were working on the job description was, it was very clear that when we were writing this and sort of comparing it to how Brian was performing the job, Brian was obviously doing more than what we were writing the job description for, and her credentials and the way she presents herself seems like way beyond sort of what we wrote the job description for too. And I just think it's more than what I was hoping for sure. It's great.
I think when we met and looked at the resumes, yes, you were right. She was the head and shoulders above, and I think I remember, I may have said it, I may have just been thinking it, but if her in-person skills match this resume, we've got a winner.
Or her cover letter was outstanding.
Yeah, and I think that I would think, and I think that they did. They certainly did.
I agree.
Yeah, one of the things that, it's unfortunate that we have to compare, well, I compare her to Brian just because Brian is,
So we know.
Yeah, and one of the important things was, Brian presented a very honest opinion to people. He was the face of town hall to so many people, to developers, to the community, someone they could trust. They knew that Brian would always tell them He was always straight with them. And I think that's really important to have. And I believe that Kelly will provide that same sort of trust and assurity to the community. And so I think that's one of the important things, is that I am really concerned, to be honest, about, she has done so much with a larger group of people in Arlington that she's going to find herself in this one spot, and all of these things that she has been able to do. I think that there will be a sort of this transition where she'll have to put some things on the shelf.
Well, that was kind of the nature of my last
Yes,
question,
yes,
because I
yes.
thought, oh, you know, that's going to be different, and I didn't want to say it, but she's going to just have a lot of things coming at her, and she has to be the point person on all of them. But I still think she's a great candidate.
Yeah.
The point about the 6 months, I think, is really true, because any new job you're in, especially if you're taking a step up,
Sure.
6 months, you have to give it,
Oh, of course.
to get used to it.
That's a year.
Well, yeah.
We don't have a year.
It's a big deal. I think that my response to that, and listening to Arlington and looking at how Winchester was, I mean, we're doing all of those things in Winchester. It's just not all housed in the planning and development department. And so there's a lot of expertise, both in the town and within town committees.
Which
that you
hopefully
can
she
call
will
upon. And
learn
so-
to tap.
So,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. She'll
I'm
tell
sorry,
you
what,
she's
Ellen?
got
And
me-
enthusiastic.
You know,
Sorry?
and our-
What did you say?
Hopefully she will learn to tap that. She
No,
can't
I think-
know
Oh,
that
yes.
now.
You know, all of us, Marty Jones is heading up the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. All of us tap into Marty's expertise. I mean,
Yes.
she ran mass development. She's a resource on that. And so, you know, we've got that expertise, and Marty's willing to volunteer it. You know, we've got housing expertise, we've got historic expertise. So I think it's, you know, she's not talking to someone in the same office, but, you know, that same expertise exists within Winchester, either on a volunteer basis or, you know, on other committees, and a lot within town hall.
There's a lot of institutional knowledge, like Beth.
Yeah,
You've been here
Yeah.
as long as I can remember.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's important. You know, we had a very collaborative relationship with Brian, and I think that's part of what made the relationship work. Engineering obviously goes to all of the planning board meetings, and so that connection between engineering and planning is critical. And we talked a lot about that, and, you know, when we met from a staff perspective, that, you know, the conversations happen at the copier machine or like whatever,
Yeah.
right? So that just keeping that, because it, you know, she's physically in a separate office from us, but it's important. And really that's how the lower level works, is that everybody kind of circulates between offices to have those conversations. And so I think she'll be able to kind of tap into that and fit into that culture we
She
have.
already have a good working relationship. I mean,
Yeah.
they're gonna be in the same office.
No, that's true. I used to find Brian in engineering or building department all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been looking for him.
Do I hear in your voice you miss being on the lower level?
Very soft spot in my heart for the lower level, yeah, the basement.
She only touched sort of briefly on it, although it was in her sort of materials. But I think one of her, like maybe even a strength above Brian, although I didn't get to know him on this level as well, is she's really pushing the data and the organization piece. And I think if that's sort of her bend, if she's sort of that introvert who is, you know, will open the door and engage the public, but really likes to sort of head down and do a spreadsheet. You know, there's been movement, I know, on the planning board from the first meeting that I joined, and then on the Conservation Commission, interest in sort of figuring out how do we better audit ourselves and how do we keep track. And if that sort of, that will help her efficiency and as a point of communication with everyone. So I think that will be sort of a strength that she may even be able to grow past Brian with. And I love Brian, but.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, everyone has a different set of skills.
Yeah, and I think that'll be a
and
good
certainly, I
She
think
will love the MBTA spreadsheet.
Oh, the
Who doesn't love a
spreadsheet?
good
no
spreadsheet?
one loves the MBTA
It's
spreadsheet.
about, yeah, no.
You know, I
It's
mean,
it's complex.
Brian grew into the job. You said that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right,
yeah.
that's right.
I mean,
You did.
And
Brian.
Yeah, and a
yeah.
lot of the regulations grew while Brian was here, right? So
Yeah, that's right.
it's gonna be a little bit harder for her to, you know, the CBD stuff, Brian was here from the conception to the
Yeah.
implementation, and it's gonna be a little bit harder for somebody coming in,
wrote a
but
lot
that,
of that.
right, so there's gonna be a learning curve, but that happens, you know,
Right.
happens in any position.
Okay, so if the planning board wants to I don't know how this works, but I would say the planning board should make, someone on the planning board should make a motion.
I'll make a motion to hire, or to make an offer
Make an offer.
to Kelly
I could second that.
Linema,
Linema, she
Linema?
said.
Line them up?
Oh, it's Linema?
For
We
the
will
position.
I think
ask-
that's how she pronounced it.
Okay, good, thank you.
Linema, okay.
We'll just have to remember that, line them, Kelly
Line 'em.
line 'em. So
For
we
position
have,
of town planner.
excellent, and Nick, you are seconding?
Yes.
And so let's do a roll call vote, because, although we could all say all in, let's do it, all in favor.
That's how we do it.
All-
Aye.
Okay, none opposed, no abstentions. We can't do that on Zoom anymore. I mean, that's why we have to do this roll call, but in person, we can be old-fashioned. Oh, I could even bring the gavel
And
out.
if you guys,
Do you have your little clock?
Sally,
We have a gavel too, just so you know.
Sally and Deab, for your job shepherding this process, which I think it wasn't too long ago when we said that you guys would be the good people to shepherd it, and it seems to have yielded fruit.
And I think, thank you to Sally and Dehab for stepping
sure.
in
Yes,
to
thank
the
Yeah.
staffing the position while
But even
I was
absent
gonna
from
comment.
Denver,
huge amount of
it
work,
was a
so.
lot.
Her commute from West Medford may be short, to Winchester may be shorter than her commute to Arlington town.
We've
Sure
shaved
is.
Oh,
3
it's
to 5
certainly not
minutes.
any longer.
You know, I speak with Brian occasionally, and I still recall the first week he went, I talked to him, he said, I went home for lunch today and took the dog out
Taking
for a
dogs out, yeah.
walk.
Good for Brian.
So,
That's
you
good.
know.
Hey, there's something to be said for quality of life, you know?
It really is, and you know, Brian had always said that he had no intention of leaving, and I think he really meant that, he really loved working here, and.
But, you know, I think if she accepts this, and that's what I
you know,
hope and pray, that we don't have to start the process all over
Oh,
again,
God.
but,
Sally and I are resigning if she doesn't take it.
That'd be so cruel.
but I also think that it's always good, I mean, you know, Brian had a good amount of time here to grow and do all what he did, and I don't think it's a bad thing, you know, if we get someone like this to, you know, experience a different perspective.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so, thank you all very much. I think we need a motion to adjourn from the planning board would be really welcome.
Can I just ask the question, before we have a motion, how does it work from here?
I was gonna talk
do
to
we make
you
the offer? When
offline
do we-
here,
when do
so
we call
we'll
it?
have to, you'll have to,
We'll work
you
with
can work with
HR.
me and the HR director to put an offer
And
letter
I think
together.
select board has to step in and say something, that's what Brian said, you have to wave your magic wand or something, because there's some select board thing, because it's a personnel issue. No? Okay.
Gavel.
I think the only thing I think is if she accepts the job, we would waive the 15-day waiting.
No, it's not my appointment.
Not your
So that's
appointment,
it's only if it's my appointment.
Okay.
But you guys are the
What's
appointing
the
authority.
15-day what?
The only thing would be if you're offering the salary above the median, you have to go to the personnel board to get that approved, but
Okay, well, we'll work that out. We'll
My
talk,
question is, how long is she gonna wait until we tell her?
oh, I'm gonna call her up tomorrow morning,
Okay.
and I'm gonna
Yeah,
say,
but you
we're
should call
gonna,
her right
we
now,
would
yeah.
love to have you join with us.
Gotta play a little
So I just want to say the morning starts at 12:01 a.m.
I am a pumpkin by then, so.
Have
a nice call.
I'd sure like her to be at the town meeting this year.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
she has commitments in Arlington that she wants to see through, so
When-
she told me that, you know, she needs to at least give the 2 weeks' notice, she wants a personal week off, which I think is
Sure,
great.
that's fair.
And she said they're going through their town meeting preps, so.
Do we know the dates of their town meeting?
About the same as us.
We will.
Goes till June, apparently.
Yeah, so so that's something we'll talk about, obviously we want her as soon as possible, so we'll have a conversation trying to see what the minimum time is. And then, I guess Shelley and I will be here tomorrow morning for our normal Friday
Yep.
meeting. You probably won't be able to have any time to see us, but we'll go and talk, you're never around when I want to talk to you. You're busy. We can go talk to Mike Town at HR and see what the process is for moving forward. And so, thank you all very
I'd
much.
also just like to say what a pleasure it is to be meeting in person.
Yeah.
And design review is starting next month, is going back, and I'm really hoping planning board will as well.
Planning board, I think we have competing, we have people who have childcare who would like to be able, planning board would like flexibility, but in-person meetings, I think, is something we do want to do. But, yeah, it's,
I just think it's really important for the,
Back last July.
well, we went back once, and then
Yeah.
You know, we've been back and
all
forth a
that,
couple of times, and, but we're doing it now, and I just think it's really useful for when the public wants to come and face-to-face, and
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's really, you know, it's just a better environment, just as far as communication.
But, you know, to be honest, we've had larger audiences join us in our Zoom session than we ever had
Right, we
in
had
person.
44, yeah.
It's,
Well, one
it's,
Zoom.
and I, you know, we're such fascinating people in person, I don't know why
Yes and
they
no.
wouldn't come
I
and
think
see
there's
us. but,
trade-offs,
yeah.
you know.
In any case, did we have a motion?
No,
Well,
Move to
someone,
adjourn.
please make a
We
motion.
need a motion to adjourn.
Yes, did you just make it?
I believe I did.
I just seconded it.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Okay,
Thanks,
thank you,
everybody.
WinCam, thank you, everyone out in TV land.